Welcome to Afros and Audio's Black History Month interview series. My name is Talib Jasir, founder and CEO of Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, the first two-day conference for and by Black independent podcast creatives and audio professionals. I'm excited to spotlight 28 outstanding indie podcast creatives who answered the call to be a part of this series. Today, my guest is Lloyd George. Welcome and thank you for being here. How are you, man?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So before we get into the podcast and all the great work you're doing, let the folks know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Lloyd. I was originally born in Zimbabwe. I've been living in the United States for the last 17 years. I've been a podcaster for the last 5 years. And my goal every day is just how I can inspire someone else to be more of themselves.
All right, man. I appreciate that. So tell us about Cre8tor Hub.
Yeah, so Cre8tor Hub is a company my wife and I started. It initially just started as an idea, trying to figure out how we could be more creatives. And so that started initially just by us starting a podcast and figuring out every week, could we put out something that's engaging, something that's exciting, something that's cool. And it's since morphed from them into like a podcast management company. And a lot of that came out of people just seeing our podcast and saying, hey, could you do that for me? I really like how you did this. Could you do that for me? And so we've taken advantage of that and built a business together.
That's awesome. So when did you start the podcast?
December 2021.
Okay. And how's it been going for you so far?
Great. I view it as like just a creative expression. So I haven't put any pressure on myself. I'm not the person that's going to say, hey, you need to have an episode every single week or it's not worth doing. I'm more just like view it like music. It's like, hey, I started, I feel inspired today, I'll create. If I don't next week, that's okay too. And so it's been fantastic. I put out 7 episodes last year. And then this year so far, I've put out 11 episodes. So it's been fantastic.
All right, that's great. So when it came to you choosing the format for the podcast, during how you would move it forward, let's just start with the first season. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely an anomaly when it comes to like podcast formats, because the approach I used was, what if I made every single episode a different format? Therefore, if I did a format that I felt like resonated with me or excited me or was just a little easier flowing, then I had to know, oh, that's the format. Do more of that. That's even just how I started it. I called the podcast Untitled. Like that was the entire name for the first season. And so the first episode, I'm just like solo. The third episode, I'm interviewing someone. I think the last few episodes, it's just a mix of both. I'm talking to my wife, and I didn't necessarily have a particular format. And that's still what I do today. I just continuously mix it up and I try different things. And so I publish 4 episodes per month. One is a solo. One is an interview with a guest, one is a conversation with my wife, and the last is just like a journal entry.
That's cool, man. One of the most important things I found with podcasting is that it does lend itself to experimenting,
Yep.
seeing what sticks, seeing how you want to express yourself, not only with your voice, but artistically, creatively. I think it lends a lot to that, especially with the combination of being a creative and an entrepreneur. That's the whole thing, is the trial and error, test and improve what's going to work for you. So I think that's a really cool approach that you've taken to it. And I really would love to see more people saying, I see what's happening over here. I see how that's working for them, but I'm going to just see what I do. I think it's important.
That's a great point. Like, I wish more people did that. Like, I see what you're doing and I see what you recommend, but I'm just going to make this my own thing and customize it. And I see a lot of people in music do that really well. Kendrick Lamar is not looking at J. Cole to figure out like, oh, what format is he using? He's just like using this as like his own creative expression. And I'd love to see more podcasters do that. Podcasters are very habitual, and I think we put a lot of pressure on people to follow a specific format. And if they don't follow that format, we say that's wrong.
Yeah, and that's wrong. That's wrong. For sure, because and when you think about music artists like you're talking about now, there was a time where there was a formula, right? People thought that this is what worked, and then they figured out, oh, I can do this without a record label.
Right.
It blew everything out the water, and now you see more creativity. You think about Tyler, the Creator, and other artists like him, and you see the creativity that happens when you are no longer putting yourself in a box and saying, I've got to meet this standard, I've got to meet this format. You see some of our favorite artists who have mixtapes, and as soon as they got on a label, you're like, this ain't it, man. This ain't it. I wish you was back when it was just you. So no, I respect that, man. You're so right. And I love that's an example that you're setting. And I'm glad that you said it out loud here because it is this opportunity for us to break status quos. You know, it's this opportunity for us to not do what it has always looked like because otherwise we'll be doing it the same way forever. So it's important to disrupt in that way. And so when we think about disruption and we think about this opportunity we have in the podcast industry to disrupt, this is what it looks like.
Yep.
Doing whatever the hell you want and making it work for you.
I like that quote. I'm gonna take that. Do whatever the heck you want.
Absolutely. Hey, it's yours, man. It's yours. So I love that. Again, I love your approach to it. And so what have you coming into your first episode and now on your 11th episode of the second season, how would you say you have grown as a creative and even as an entrepreneur in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question because I view my podcast as another playground for me to grow as a creative. And not just as a creative, because there's other aspects in which I grow. For instance, my two big goals for this year were, can I meet new and amazing people using my podcast? And can I make money using my podcast? And the reason this was a challenge is because I don't have a super big following. And so the idea, what would it look like for me to make $1,000 with this podcast this year? Knowing that I think at the time when I started this year, I was getting about like 75 downloads per episode. And so trying to figure out like, how can I leverage what I have where I am to hit some of those goals versus maybe what I think I would have said when I first started this journey as a creator, which is that I'm not big enough, so I can't accomplish any of those things. And so this year, my podcast has been a great playground just for me to like stretch my faith, believe in myself more, be a little more authentic, pursuing some of my goals. And I just view it just as that. Like at the very least, even if this podcast doesn't grow beyond what it is, it's going to teach me a lot just as a human being.
Absolutely, man. Me being in my fourth decade, knowing that I've lived about 4 different lifetimes in these 4 decades, it is important because you don't know where you're going to end up. You only know where you are right now. And so your vision kind of sticks with where you are right now, but it's going to grow the more you grow and the more you stretch. So kudos to you for doing that, man. And people have heard me say this a bunch in this series itself, but as a life coach, I'm very big on intention and accelerating the process by identifying a goal. And instead of saying, I don't know how to do it, I'll never make it there, get intentional about the steps to getting there because everything you do is a step in that direction. It all counts.
1000%. That's so well put. And I think that's I want to think about life more that way, that these are just all building blocks and you're just stacking them versus maybe how I used to think about it before, which is just like, you either got it or you don't. You either hit the goal or you didn't. But this whole collection of life, if every month is like a small block, what can I be doing now so that in 12 months, I'm proud of where I'm at?
Absolutely. And that's where it's at. That's to me, the measurement of success is to let it be internal, not external.
That's good.
Yeah. How can you find the pride in what you've done? Forget all the noise because that's how you grow, man. So I appreciate you sharing that for sure. So what would you say has been one of your biggest wins so far with the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, I'll say the biggest one, like last week, I found out I was featured in Apple's new Noteworthy, which I think is like a great accomplishment within itself. But when I take a step back and think about like why that specific accomplishment made me happy, I felt like I've been very consistent, both like with my podcast. And I feel like even the times where I haven't been like publishing, so I'm at a total of like 19 episodes right now. Even the times when I wasn't publishing, there hasn't been a single week where I haven't dedicated at least like 1 to 2 hours to learn something new. Like a lot of my time I spent like consuming articles to figure out like how I can explain things that are happening in the podcast space better, how I can just be educated enough to know it myself. And so to me, like I wake up with this idea, which is just every single day, can I wake up and just learn one big idea for the day? And so the idea, for instance, for today is just, I was chatting with someone and learning that your podcast show notes are important and writing them for people that could actually use them, that there actually might be people that don't have time to listen to your episode, but they're going to look at your show notes and say, is this something I want to listen to? So that is like the big idea for today. So I learned that information. figured out how to explain it to other people. And that's my big idea for today. And so trying to figure out like, how can I be consistent every single day, just doing that, just looking at this as like a regimen. And I felt like I was just getting to the point where I was feeling a little frustrated. I was telling my wife, gosh, I feel like I've been doing this for 6 months. I haven't seen any results. I was like this creative lull. And the same day that was happening is the same day that I found out I was being featured on Apple's New and Noteworthy. And so it felt like, to me, it was, I don't even know how to articulate it, but this sort of like culmination of all of these things happening and God rewarding me for that consistency. And so in my mind, I'm correlating this big success or this big accomplishment with this sort of like consistency that I've been doing.
Yeah, man. It's so true. I always say the universe is working on your behalf, whether it feels like it or it doesn't, right? There's always something going on that you don't even see coming. And that's the beautiful part about being in that law and saying that this is what it is. Once you learn that life is ebb and flow in general, the ebbs aren't as harsh because you know you're going to be back in flow. That's what's up, man. I really love that. When you think about, and I definitely want to get into kind of the service aspect of the podcast and the work that you're doing, and that this might tie in thinking about your expansion and what you see this year. And you mentioned a little bit, but what you see this year really looking like for yourself as a creative, but also as a professional in the space?
Yeah. So I've been trying to think about that and being very intentional about where I want to be 12 months from now. And that answer has changed. A year ago, it was like, hey, I want to create content and be a full-time content creator. But now I think that goal is to essentially provide a service to other people, helping them manage their podcast. And so my wife and I have continued with our business, Cre8tor Hub, just helping people that are really busy, taking on their podcast, editing it for them, writing their show notes, publishing it for them. And we really enjoyed that. And so right now I only have 2 clients because it's relatively new, but I'm hoping 12 months from now that I have 10 clients and that I'm able to help them and really make them feel like, gosh, I'm glad I started a podcast. I'm glad I'm working with Lloyd because I save X amount of time per week.
That's awesome, man. And you keep shouting out your wife. Let's shout her name out, man. Let's give her some
Yeah.
props.
Yeah. Ashley George is her
All right.
name. And I'm super, super grateful for her.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Shout out to Ashley. So as you think about, and this is something that we have, Corey and I from Black Podcast Association and others have talked about, there's a lot of information that comes through the pipeline on what you should be doing, how you should do it, what it should look like, and all these sorts of things. And it sounds like you're working to just break down some of these things that are more easily digestible for folks to, one, understand, but also to create an opportunity for people to sustain their podcast and make sure that if they start it, they're able to stick with it because you are a point of service for them. And I think that's really important because as creatives, a lot of folks really just want to be behind the mic. And then it's all the other stuff that makes them say, I can't with this. Yeah. And it's like, I completely understand because it is a lot, but you are working to be a support for folks like that. And you alluded to it's like, I've done it. I've gotten some practice. I've done the work. And so I know how to support others. But I want to dig a little deeper and understand why you decided that was the mission for this year.
Yeah, I feel like podcasting has changed my life and transformed my life in such an insane way. For example, I didn't go to college, so I don't have a degree or anything. And so I've always worried and had this anxiety that, gosh, am I going to have a career? Am I going to be like financially stable? Am I going to find work that I can actually like grow in and hopefully get into leadership one day? And I've always felt like on paper, I'm not super qualified. But I've literally made podcast episodes about specific topics and had people reach out to me, like offering me jobs or offering me the opportunity to interview. And that's just one example where like podcasting and really showcasing the information that you know can open doors for you more than like your resume could. And so I started having all of these different experiences that surrounded around my podcast. Sometimes I'd try and reach out to people and email them and they'd say no. And then I'd meet someone of the same caliber on my podcast. And it was like instantly we were like close friends. They like gave me their cell phone number. Those are just some of the things that like some of the ways that podcasting opens a door for you. And so I knew off the jump that like, oh my gosh, like I need to tell as many people this as possible, like start a podcast, even if you don't want to be a creator, because it really can help you. It's just like getting a portfolio. And so when I started creating podcast tips to help people, I feel like a lot of people were resonating with my podcast tips. And I even started to meet people that already had a podcast. And I'd ask them certain questions that I thought were just very basic surface level questions. and they didn't know that information. I'd be like, hey, have you heard of this podcast conference? It's in Vegas, it's in Denver, it's in wherever. And they didn't know any of this information. And that was the first time I realized that, oh my gosh, I think there's a lot of information that's being gate kept in like the podcast world, that unless you're like a sophisticated podcaster, this information is not going to translate down to you. And so I figured in that way I could be a conduit, just taking all of the information that I read in newsletters. I will study the Black Podcaster Report to understand what it's saying, break it down to you in a way that only takes 2 minutes to understand, because you may not have 15 minutes to read it. And so I found an opportunity to service people. And I think a lot of people have resonated with my work in that way.
That's amazing. And one of the real reasons that Afros and Audio started was because we know that there's information gatekeeping. We know that there's access gatekeeping. We know all of those things. And Google's free to everybody and everybody can use it, but nobody had time for that. I need to, sometimes there are people, and especially that creative brain, and some professionals that also have that creative brain, but a lot of times it's difficult to pause and stop the work in order to learn about a thing without some direct intentional seeking the information out, or that guidance to just one day the universe brings you to Lloyd's LinkedIn page. You're like, oh, this is exactly where I need to be. So that's awesome. And it is important work, because again, wanting to increase podcasts, especially by Black creatives in the active global market, but also that the sustainability is there. The information is what supports.
Right. 1000%. And I think that's a great point. And I think in the future, I hope we start seeing more of that. That it's like, I used to live in a small city in Atlanta before I moved to DC, and the county we were in, they had a podcast, like just a normal resident started a podcast to support that community. And so I think in the future, we'll start seeing more creative ways that Black people are using podcasts to like better our community as a whole.
Absolutely. Wanting to see it in Black businesses, wanting to see it as an extension of organizations, wanting to see podcast episodes as resources for nonprofits, for prison reform, for everything that's possible. There's so many options and opportunities. And that, I think, is the dynamic aspect of podcasting, because something starts from an audio space and it becomes a cornerstone for so much that can be built around it and on it. Yeah. And getting more people to understand that, especially in our community where, and this is true for everyone, but we're still YouTube and television and radio is our default source for information and news. But at a certain point in the future, it's going to shift, and podcasting is going to be kind of that number one aspect, because our lives are just adapting to that. We're moving so much.
1000%. And like, at least at this current time that we're talking about this, most of the podcasts are free. There's a gentleman that was actually at Afros and Audio conference, but he has a podcast helping people manage their diabetes. And every single week he puts out content. And the fact that he's putting out all this content for free just blows my mind. Like, even if you bought a book talking about how to overcome your diabetes, you'd have to pay for that. It's crazy that this is all free.
Yeah, man, it's all free. Water was free at one point, and now it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
And one day our air might not be, but I don't expect to be here for that, hopefully. But at any rate, you're right. I remember at the first Afros and Audio conference, someone there mentioned that podcasting was like early 90s hip hop, right? Just coming out the gate. And people were figuring out, what do we do with this? What category do we put it in? How do we push this forward? Is it marketable? Can we sell it? Can people excel in this area, in this medium? And turns out, yeah, and I think we are still in that space with podcasting. I think we might have gotten into 2000s. We were all about it at this point, but yeah, it's still one of those industries that still a lot of education is needed. Some people still think it's a hobby. Some people still don't get it. So as we overcome those, it's going to be much more of an in-demand industry. And we'll see. Like, we don't even know where this industry is going. I think that's the greatest part about it.
Yeah, 1000%. And I haven't quite found the words to describe this yet, but I do think also that there's different podcast paths. And I don't think podcasting is moving at the same time for everyone. So for instance, if you're like a white podcaster with a primarily white demographic. Where podcasting is for you might be very different for someone that has like a Black target audience, where podcasting may not even be like mainstream just yet. And so I think there's tremendous opportunities just for like people of color, specifically Black people, but it's a good thing to see. And I'm so happy like I'm a part of this movement. I'm so happy I'm a part of podcasting at the current stage it's at.
Absolutely, man. What a time to be alive, for sure. And just with the recent Black Listening Report and seeing that, I just did a pitch deck for a company for one of our initiatives. And that pitch deck, before this latest numbers came out, all I had was 13% Black listener on it. And then here we go, 43%. So it's ever changing, it's ever evolving. And that is the great part of it. But part of that responsibility is on us, right? We've got to be willing to create and stand by it and say, I have a podcast, listen to my podcast.
Yeah.
Here you go, my podcast. Because if we don't do that, then we're the ones that are gatekeeping and creating the space where we don't move at the level that we get to move in, because it's 100% inventive and we get to make it up as we go.
Yeah, 1000%. And actually, I got to ask you about that, because I think there's this ongoing rumor in the podcast space where it's like, hey, it's a lot easier to convince somebody that already listens to podcasts to listen to your podcast than it is to go and get somebody new to listen to your podcast. But I find with the people around me, if I was not around a podcast community and I just went to my mom, my brother, my aunt, my sister, none of them listen to podcast. I literally am the first person adding the podcast app to their cell phone and saying, listen to my podcast. What do you think about that?
Yeah, me too. And that's, again, the responsibility, right? I do a biopic podcast that just completed finally. And this cat is out in Durham, North Carolina. So I go over there right before we go to the studio, and he's got a couple of cats sitting around and we're chilling, and they're like, podcast? What you mean? And so we're trying to go back and forth. And I'm like, just download my app. Here's my app, download that, listen to it from here. Yeah. We have a social media, Instagram. They think that the snippets that are on the social media is the podcast. So again, we are responsible for making sure that we convert.
Yep. And
we're not going to convert everyone, because again, it's still something that people are learning about. But if not us, who will?
Yep.
If not the creators.
That's I love that line. We're responsible for helping people convert and transitioning into the industry, that we do have some onus on that. It's not completely out of our hands.
None of it is out of our hands, including the support and resources to get more podcasters in the industry that look like us and help them by any means possible to sustain and stay in the industry. And so I know I take that responsibility to the heart, and I can tell that you do too, man. It's important. So that's great, man. I love that we were able to have that conversation, and I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I appreciate it.
All right. As you move this forward, you have the newsletter that you're working on. I definitely want you to touch on that. How do you want Lloyd George to be known and Ashley George to be known at the end of the day in this industry?
Yeah, Ashley and I like to view ourselves as like professional plugs. We like finding opportunities and things that people don't know about and saying, I can't believe you don't know about this. It's going to change your life. Sign up today, buy your ticket today. And that's actually why we started the newsletter. I kept finding a bunch of creator opportunities. Like the first one I found was like HubSpot has this like creator accelerators, and they were literally paying podcasters, like I think it was like $1,000 a month. I can't remember. And I know HubSpot was actually your sponsor at the last, not this Afros on Audio, but the one before, and they spoke about it. That to me just blows my mind that opportunity even exists. And so with the newsletter, every single week, we're basically sending out, I have this database of over 100 different creator programs I created. And so I'm basically just like emailing people so that they know about all of these opportunities. And that's, I think, how we want to be remembered. Just like we love giving people their first opportunity or helping people that can't find opportunities, just to like help them grow. And that just gives us like great fulfillment.
That's great, man. That's a great mission to have. Like truly great. I appreciate that. Anything else that you want to promote or talk about before I end up with like my last two questions?
I do just want to stress the importance of a community. And I think that like it's important that you join a group, that you join BPA, that you find some community of people doing what you do, because you'll be surprised not only just like how many opportunities you don't know about, but also just like the journey we're on is a marathon and it takes time. But to weather the storm, to be there for the entire journey, you need community.
Yeah, man, that's so true. And I've been thinking about this a lot, being a community builder.
Yep.
And a lot of times, and also I'm a public policy major graduate, and I realized that in a lot of organizations, a lot of policies that are made around cities and local and regional, is a lot of folks looking from the outside in and saying, this is what you need,
Mhm.
versus allowing the people to say, this is what I want. And what I've discovered inside of this is that we are people who podcast. And so we need a lot more than just podcast information. We
Mhm.
need support. We need to feel welcomed and accepted and encouraged and all these things, because that's how you keep going when it's just you and there's this feeling like, am I enough or can I do this? Having people around you that can not only champion you, but also support you is a major key, man. And
Yeah.
so it is important that we have community, and Black Podcast Association is doing a great job. So yeah, man, thank you for mentioning that. What would you say to the aspiring and new? You're relatively new. You're not new, but you're relatively new. What would you say to the aspiring and new podcaster who is looking to get into the industry?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice I'd give is become okay with failure and give yourself permission to explore. You don't need to have it figured out. And I think the more room you give yourself to try different things, the sooner you'll find the thing that works for you. For example, you asked me earlier about podcast formats. If you don't give yourself permission to try different formats, it's going to take you a lot longer to find the format that works for you. But if you just say, hey, I'm going to dedicate my first 10 episodes to trying different formats, you may get there a lot faster than someone that isn't saying that. And so just give yourself permission to fail. We're human, we're trying new things, we're creatives, and it's okay not to always get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the creator's prerogative, I like to say.
Yeah.
It's creative.
Right.
So what you doing if you're not being creative? Why are you trying to put creativity inside of a linear journey or inside of a box? That is the
Yeah.
complete opposite of creativity.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that permission is important, and the permission to pivot and do whatever else you need to do
Yeah.
is important as well.
Absolutely. When you just said that, it made me think of, I was watching a Tyler, the Creator interview earlier, and I don't think I've really dove into a lot of his music, but I generally find that in his interviews, he inspires me just as like creator and pushing the envelope, trying new things. It's great to see. And I constantly want to feel like I'm pushing myself to become more creative. And when I look back on where I am 12 months ago, I want to feel like, oh my gosh, you've really grown as like a creative. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, and you did it on your own terms. That's the
Yeah.
most important part of it. Definitely. You attended Afros in Audio this year. What were your thoughts? Tell us a little bit about your experience.
I was on a high that whole weekend. That was just like one of the best experiences I've ever had. And I remember I was excited to be there for a number of different reasons, but I'll take a step back. This is no shade to anyone else, but I will say like I was at a different conference earlier on in the year, and I was telling somebody else that like everywhere I went to that conference, we might be in a room with 1,000 people, like at a party or something, but all the Black people would just find each other and they'd go to some corner in the back and we just all kick it. And it was like, it was so fun just all being together. And so now to be at like a conference where the entire place is Black, like it's just like, it was so crazy. I loved that. It gave me so much energy. And I left feeling like energized and not like physically, but it was like my spirit had been like charged up. And so I really needed that. And so I loved it because of that. But also I got the opportunity to speak and be on a panel. And it just reminded me that, man, like one last anecdote. I was on another panel last week, and a few people on the panel was saying sometimes it was about how like Black creators need like sponsorship and how like brands don't often give us opportunities. And one of the people on stage was just saying, don't be afraid to reach out to Black business owners. Don't be afraid to reach out to Black creators, Black whoever, because you're more likely to get opportunities from them than these other people that may not know you. And that was like my experience with like Afros and Audio. The fact that I was able to be on a panel, that's something I've wanted to do for years. I was able to check that off my bucket list. I was able to challenge myself and grow as a creative. It's like those opportunities, like being able to come into like our home as Black creators and get some of those opportunities, get the opportunity to grow together. It makes the world of difference. And I don't think there's anywhere else we can go and find that.
Absolutely. It's point and purpose, man. It's the reason for it. And so thank you for sharing that. And I'll tell you a little secret about choosing you for the panel. When I went to another conference that was bigger than mine, because we're still the little engine that could, which is amazing. But I've been to several conferences myself, and even being, Talib Jasir, even like last year, I went to a Black conference and I was kind of standing around by myself, just, hi, you want to talk to me? Can we connect? And there was like nothing. I was like, I don't ever want anybody to feel like this at Afros and Audio. And that was something that became intentional from day one. But choosing you for the panel that we did, which was State of Black Podcast, which is something that we've been doing since the inception of the conference. And it's the one panel that is consistent every year. I see you, man. And I see that you are a young person in this industry and is serious, means something to you. You're passionate about it. And then you have this heart of service that you want to make sure that folks win inside of the industry. And I always want to, whether you feel like you are enough for it or ready for it or what have you, you are. And so that's my way of saying, let's go.
Yeah.
Time is of essence. Let's go. You now.
Right.
We don't have to wait, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to wait for anything, because this is how you show the possibility of each of us in this space, and that we all get to go and we all are deserving of our voices and being heard and being seen. It was intentional to pull you in for that, because I want you to keep going, because I know that you can, and I know that you will, and I know that you got everything in you to make a serious impact in this industry.
Yo, I really appreciate that. And it means a lot to me to hear you say that. And I just want to add one more thing that I noticed about the conference that I felt like it was significant and can be overlooked. I think there's like this safeness, and even theoretically, like assuming you got two opportunities, one to speak at a larger conference and then one to speak at like Afros and Audio, for instance, even if you got the same exact opportunity, there's like this, it's almost like a safe environment to grow. And even like after I got off stage, like I felt like I did like my best, but it was like the first time I was on stage, and there were a few people there that knew that. The amount of people that came up to me after and was just like, yo, that was amazing. You did so cool. Yo, it's so dope that you did that. It was fantastic, man. I love seeing you up there. Like, I'm convinced that regardless of how I would have done it, they would have came up to me the exact same way. And so it almost is like this safe environment for us to grow together. We're rooting for each other. We're going out of our way to make sure each other know we're supported. We want to see each other see our full potential. And that is like, to me, a critical aspect of growing, more than just getting opportunities. Because if you get opportunities, but you're not set up for success, what's the point of that? And so I really appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you. One, you jumped in for that, and two, you jumped in for this. And so that is something we don't take for granted. So I appreciate you for showing up and being a part of this industry. You could have chosen any other medium of expression and any other industry, but you chose this. And I'm glad you're here. And any way that we can be in contribution to you and support the mission, I'm here for it, man.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. If you have anything else to say, feel free to say it now. If there's anything else you want to push, feel free to push it now. Otherwise, go ahead and throw out your social media and how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My social media on all social platforms is at Lloyd, not George. That's Lloyd, not George.
Bet, man. Do you have a website?
I do. It's at Lloyd, not George, too.
Cool.
Try to make it as simple as possible for people.
Yeah. All right, dope. I appreciate having you, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to close this out now. I want to give a big thanks to our Afros and Audio and Black podcast community for supporting our commitment for community and collaboration. If you'd like to join the Black Podcasters Association, the link will be in the description below. And if you want to join us at the 5th annual Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, visit bit.ly/AFAUFAQ, which will also be in the description. Follow us on all social media channels at Afros and Audio. Thanks again, Lloyd, for being a part of Afros and Audio's first ever Black History Month interview series, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No doubt, man.